with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neal Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neal Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. Hey, Rich, there's some rumblings right now. I mean, we're going to get into this, but I do want to mention it right off at the beginning that maybe, just maybe, the United States and China are starting to talk about rescinding the tariffs and putting back things to a more normalized relation economically and giving the marketplace some more certainty about what the trade relations are going to be between the world's number 1 and 2 economy. I really hope they're able to put something together. What say you?
Well, that would be remarkable. You know, neither country, wants a disaster on their hands. It just, they want to find a way to get out of this, and China certainly needs us. So, as we said, and we've been covering this for quite a while, if in fact a deal can be worked out in some form and fashion, the reality of what it would do to the markets is dynamic and very really exciting to think about it. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
That's right.
Things have a way of getting sidetracked every now and then, but you never know. As I said, both sides want a way out of this.
And we're going to talk more about that, and a very, very important thing politically, certainly in our country, and even President Xi in China. I mean, he's got a lot riding on this as well. I mean, economically, things have not been going well in China. I think they both have to find a way out. They both got to declare victory, and I think President Trump has to really show that he got something. But will he get something that matters? Well, we're going to find out. Hey, but Rich, the other big thing going on right now is over in Europe, and what's happening at the European Union in relation with the UK, or I should say, what is the UK doing in relation to the European Union? Because it's all them right now deciding whether or not to accept this flawed deal.
Well, we are living in very exciting times. You can't say this is a short news cycle environment for us. But yeah, I mean, here we have, we're trying to get things together with China. In the meantime, the UK voted 2.5 years ago to leave the European Union, and that hasn't happened yet. We almost had a toppling of our government in the UK just the other day. Prime Minister May is hanging on by her fingertips right now. The wolves are biting at her feet. Merkel would love to see this not happen. She'd like to punish, those in the UK. It's just a very exciting time. And the reality is there's so much uncertainty around the world right now. So I'm looking forward to this dialogue to find out, where we find some stability and what could happen.
Well, let's bring on right now William Ogborn, who's a strategic communications and public diplomacy expert. He's worked with the U.S. House of Representatives, the Department of Defense, the State Department, the Commerce Department, NATO. He's worked on 2 presidential campaigns, Governor Scott Walker, someone who's been on our show, Ben Carson. I mean, he's had a very incredible career in Washington. And besides all of that, he's an all-around good guy, and we're very, very pleased to have him on the show right now. Well, William, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks. I really appreciate you having me on today.
So tell us, kind of distill down for us what happened in the UK. Prime Minister May, I mean, she seems to be, having a lot of problems here, getting people on board. I really don't know what Labour and Corbyn, I mean, those guys are really hard to figure out. I mean, is he for it, against it? What would he vote for? I mean, does he want another referendum? God forbid we have another referendum. I think that would be terrible. But a lot of people are talking about that. I mean, imagine all those millions of people who voted, and now, the other side who lost says, well, okay, we lost, but let's vote again. I mean, come on now. So what's going to come out of this? Is there going to be another vote?
Well, she has to come back with her plan B next week. So we're going to see another vote, and I'm betting that that's going to fail as well. And then I wouldn't be surprised if Corbyn tries yet another no confidence vote. Right after that, I think Theresa will again hang on, and then we're going to have to wait and see what happens going into March 29th, which, if nothing happens, You've got a no deal. It's a hard Brexit. And most of the soft Brexiters and then all of those guys that want to remain, they don't want a no deal at all. Merkel doesn't want a no deal. EU wants a no deal. But the U.S., we do want a no deal.
Well, what would be the benefit of that in terms of not getting a no deal? Now, there's a lot of confusion on this, particularly on this side of the pond. I don't think a lot of Americans really understand on a Main Street level the significance of what's going on and what it all means. Maybe we could just kind of give a quickie on that one.
Sure. The first and foremost thing to realize is that this all creates chaos. So that's creating instability in the market. So anytime we're looking at any kind of investments that have to do with the EU, the U.S., the UK, we're not going to get any idea of what's going on until a plan is in place or until that Brexit happens. So everybody's really on edge. They don't want to really make those investments, and that's what scares people. However, if there is a no deal and the UK entirely leaves the EU, you're going to see the U.S. and some other countries probably, especially the Five Eyes, swoop in, give you a no-barrier trade deal, and you're going to see a revitalization of a lot of the industries in the UK that were shut down by the EU.
And William, I mean, Corbyn, the Labour leader in the EU, I mean, he's a crazy guy. I mean, what?
Well, he's a social democrat, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think he's beyond social democrat. I mean, this guy's a communist. I mean, I don't know what he is, but he's super, super left. What does he want out of this?
Well, he wants, first and foremost, to become prime minister. I think there's no doubt about that. And the way to prime ministership for him is to be a Remainer, is to try and have a new referendum that nullifies that Brexit vote, gets him swept into power, and then he can do what he wants, because he's been kind of forced more so into the Remain camp because that's his route to power. So he wants to see Theresa May government fall, he wants to have a new referendum, and then he wants to get right into the power.
And they would vote to the Labor would vote to stay, to remain?
Yes, at this point, Labour is absolutely on board with the Remain. You do have some soft Brexiters within that party, but overall, you could see a lot of them will want to remain. They've really kind of switched from being that working-class, blue-collar party into much more of that urban elitist party, kind of like what we've seen in the U.S., how the parties are kind of switching poles a bit.
Well, you know, this really isn't a good thing if you think about it. You know, with the Brits, what people are trying to understand is that 2.5 years ago, the British folks went to the polls. They voted to leave the EU. 2.5 years later, they're not leaving the EU. Everything seems to be up in the air. They're about to lose their government. There's a shot of having a socialist government, you know, labor-oriented / socialist government get into power in the UK, you know, aligning themselves with the elitists and the globalists that are coming out of Europe that have really screwed up economies in other countries. I mean, this really sounds like a very dangerous time, I think, when you look at it and say, well, you know what, the outcome here doesn't look great.
Well, it's a really pivotal time because if the UK decides to go with that hard Brexit, this would actually encourage other countries in the EU to try and get out, try and get a much better deal with the US and other countries, and suddenly you're going to see a dissolution of the EU in a way that Merkel, Macron, none of those guys in Germany and France want to see that, because that's the controlling interest of the EU. That's who determines what happens to all these other countries in terms of the marketplace. They suddenly will lose their power, and you'll see the U.S., I think, is the prime beneficiary of that. EU is trying to do everything possible to tie us up in the meantime, so we can't even do informal negotiations. We can't scope it. We have other things on our plate. And so we're perfectly aware of that. The UK is perfectly aware of that. And so it's really an interesting game how everybody's moving their chess pieces around, seeing how they can best prepare for if there's a soft Brexit, what does that mean? If there is a hard Brexit, what does that mean? Or if somehow, like I said, Corbyn's able to get that new referendum and then there's no Brexit at all.
And what would lead to a new referendum? Because I see a lot about that. And by the way, I see in our media over here, the liberal elite media in the U.S. is very, very positive, and you know, you can tell within their journalism that it's not really the facts that are going on; it's based on what they would wish to happen. But you definitely see it in our media that they're encouraging to have another vote.
Yes, absolutely, and I think a lot of that also comes from, again, when you look at that Brexit vote, you had a lot of the rural, from the working class, blue collar areas voting to Brexit. And then you have the urban areas, the cosmopolitan areas, London especially, voting to stay. And they're really on that train of like, here are these stupid rubes out in the country. They don't know what they're talking about. Look, they Googled what does Brexit even mean right afterwards. They don't know what they really want. We know what's best for them. And the fact of the matter is, people do know what's best for them. They see how, in cheddar, they can't even make cheese anymore because the EU forced them to shut down, saying, no, we don't like what you're producing. We're going to produce cheese somewhere else. They had to shut down the orchards that have been there for thousands of years because it's like, no, your apples aren't good enough. We're going to use the Portugal apples instead.
Yeah, amazing. Hey, William, thanks for being on the show. Very, very insightful. William Ogborn, strategic communications and public diplomacy expert, has worked with U.S. House of Representatives, the Department of Defense, the State Department, the Commerce Department, presidential campaigns. He really, really is well connected, and we're very happy to have him here sorting out Brexit for us. William, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to talk about a number of things that came up this week that impacts your jobs.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, I mean, Brexit, a very, very important thing going on over in the UK. It does have big implications for the United States, and it does have big implications for the world. And, I just don't know how to predict that one. I just don't know how to predict it. I don't know where it's going.
Neal, this is what it sounds like to me, and I wish we had a little bit more time with William because I really enjoyed his dialogue. But
it's very good.
It appears that draining the swamp in Europe. I mean, think for a second. If Britain pulled out of the UK with a hard pullout, and as he said, that opened up the door.
EU.
I mean, out of the EU, rather. Forgive me. Yes, if UK pulled out of the EU, I better get my letters straight.
Very good.
That would open the door for other countries to do the same thing. And guess what? There goes the EU, and there goes the elitist, the educated, wealthy guys and women who are controlling, the masters of the universe, so to speak, in Europe, and that is a big threat. So anything they can do to forestall or better yet, eliminate that, wipe out a government, which was what they almost did this week with May, really is in their bailiwick, and that's what they'd like to do.
And speaking about elitists and draining the swamp, it looks pretty gloomy there at Davos, the economic forum. It looks like a lot of people are not showing up. I mean, the United States is not sending a delegation. Prime Minister Theresa May from the UK said that she's not going because she's up to her eyeballs in Brexit. Another global elitist forum, and I don't really know what they accomplish, right? I really don't know. I guess it's where the Clintons went to get all this money from all their buddies over there to come to the foundation, and God knows where that money went. But I just didn't feel like they were doing the world any good.
Well, a lot of people don't think they're doing the world any good. A lot of people think they're doing themselves very good. But think what you just said. And what we read in Reuters earlier today in the last few days. The U.S. isn't going to be there. Great Britain's not going to be there. Macron's not going to be there. Good Lord, he's being stung by the Yellow Jacks. So he's not going anywhere right now. No, seriously, this is like really nuts. So who is really going to be there? I mean, if you think about it, the largest powerhouse economy in the world ain't going to be there. That's not happening. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have the self-serving, high-end corporate types who want to protect their little sinecure that they've got in their ownership of global economy. They'll be there. The lobbyists will be there. The banking elites will be there because the deals are going to get cut. There's going to be a lot of business on the sidelines, Neal. But from the optics of whether the governments are going to be there, it ain't happening. So maybe they should also, I don't know, maybe they should talk to Nancy Pelosi and see when she can fit it into the schedule, after we stop having this shutdown.
Well, she's going to have to fly a commercial.
Yeah, did you notice? Isn't that amazing?
Some of the billions of dollars that she and her husband has amassed.
I mean, I'm just stunned when you look at this stuff and you see what's out there right now. We're for the people. We're fighting for the average person. I really care about you. By the way, are my first class tickets available going to Hawaii? Okay, good. All right. That's what we're fighting for. We're going to make it happen. And oh, by the way, do they have the water sent in for me for Puerto Rico and the food that I need? Because a lot of my friend to go and put her. All right, good. But I'm really here for you. And then the next thing you know, that all of a sudden she's going to go off to Afghanistan and have meetings in Brussels. She's everywhere in the world where she shouldn't be and nowhere where she should be, which is in Washington, in the White House, and cutting a deal with this president if she really cared about the United States and the folks who live here.
And we're talking about elitists, and we're talking about the UK. I mean, that was very good that William Ogborn made the comment that the Labour Party in the UK has just become this urban elitist party. I mean, kind of like what the Democrat Party has become in the United States, right? An urban elitist party. And,
exactly
their goals are very different than the working class folks who voted for Brexit. Then you got Davos, and all of those people, George Soros and the Clintons and, that whole gang, flying in on their private jets and telling the world about how climate change is so terrible and, we should be watching our carbon footprints and imagine all the airplanes going in there and their carbon footprints. But that's okay for them, but not okay for the working person. And then you got here another thing that's happening with the left. And as you said earlier, that we got to be careful of this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has become the darling
that's what they're
of
calling her.
the
AOC.
left.
Yep.
Right? I mean, just like Barack Obama became the darling of the left. And wow, look what we went through there. So, I mean, but she is really out of it. I mean, 70% taxes, no borders, get rid of ICE. I mean, if she is the face of the Democrat Party, which she very well could be, I know there's a lot of pushback in those sort of swing districts that voted Democrat this time around and put a lot of members of the House in the House and flipped the House and gave the Democrats a very comfortable majority right now. They will lose those districts if they're not careful with OAC, as they call her.
Listen, really, really brief in 15 seconds. AOC comes up with the new Green Deal.
That's just like to eliminate fossil fuels like lock, stock, and barrel.
She doesn't even understand the deal. She doesn't even. Someone wrote it and gave it to her. Obviously, she's just a puppet, as was Obama for the globalists. But think for a second, if they were to put that in over the next X number of years, do you know and think how many jobs would be lost in the United States if we wiped out the fossil fuel industry? Just think about that. We'll get back to that later.
Yes, and as the U.S. oil production hits a record high, by the way, that just happened this week. Hey, Rich, we got coming up Michael Stumo, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. And we're going to talk about those Chinese tariffs. Don't want to miss this.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neal Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, hey, we're going to talk about those Chinese tariffs, and we're very, very pleased to have with us Michael Stumo, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Hey, look, I can support that, a prosperous America. And he's just published a piece in The Hill. The tariffs on Chinese goods should actually increase despite talks. Hey, Michael, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, Michael, over the last week, I've been reading everything that I can on this. I'm an American manufacturer, and the tariffs are hurting me, and I wish that they weren't there, and I hope that they get a deal done. But I understand, because I lived in Asia for more than 20 years. I have a long history working in China, and I understand that it's a very unfair situation. American products have been openly discriminated against by our trading partners for years and years and years. And by the way, the Chinese don't have an exclusive on that. I mean, the Japanese have done it, the Koreans have done it, the Taiwanese have done it, the Brazilians have done it, the Indians have done it. I mean, they've all done it. And we've all step back and let it happen. But okay, the Chinese have done it, and unfortunately it's become a much, much bigger problem, but they're not the only ones. I know the president's gotten tough. I know politically this is probably a good thing for him. At least it has been up until this point, but I believe it's wearing thin. And the markets don't like it. I think that people are losing their 401ks. They had this big run up. Now they had to give it back. People want a China deal. But you're saying that we should actually increase tariffs despite the talks. So tell us why.
Sure, absolutely. So the number one, the stock market is a Fed issue. It's an interest rate issue. So when the tariffs went into effect, starting with the steel tariffs last March, and then the first China tariffs in July, the second China tariffs in September, you had some market wobbling. It kept going up, but it wasn't until the Fed raised interest rates that the stock market, which is really trading in financial products, the Fed raises rates. It's a money supply issue. That's what happened. Now, our members are intermediate suppliers of goods across the country, from the auto industry, aerospace, electronics, and the like. They're all doing very, very well. They were afraid of the tariffs coming in, but they got so much new business, and they're getting so much procurement back from where the multinationals used to buy from China that they're doing well. They're hiring. So anecdotally, it's going well. We've got business coming back to the U.S. Not all China business comes back to the U.S. because some of it goes to third countries, but they're doing well. And, of course, we have the lowest unemployment since 1968. And, indeed, just today in the Wall Street Journal, it says that factory production surged at the end of the last year, and that U.S. consumer demand is making up from any pullback in exports. And we all have to remember, the biggest market we want to access in the entire universe is the one right here, and we've been giving it up. So lastly, this is a game of great powers. China is growing its military strength off the back of the U.S. consumer. We would never do that with Russia, and we need to guard in the next decades against China's interest in eroding U.S. economic, military, and geopolitical strength.
So this sounds like a long-term gain for China. I mean, I do find it interesting. When I attend certain meetings, particularly down in Miami, and I'm on the board of the board of directors for the World Trade Center, so I interact with a number of the organizations down here. And they're all very, very concerned about tariffs. And I'm like, I understand all of that, but I think we're in a very interesting position right now. And I think you pose a very, very important point. The economy in China has not been good. I mean, everyone may be under the impression that they said for years the economy is growing. How did we know it was really growing? And some of the things that I'm reading, and like you just indicated, they're down 25% in the last year or so. I've read that they're down 38% over the last few years. So they're in a very interesting position versus where we are right now, that our economy has turned dramatically since President Trump became with his administration came in power. And it would appear that if we're going to do the right thing for this country, and by the way, the world, this would be the right time, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. I mean, nobody can rebut the fact that it's a national security risk to fund the rise of China. Nobody can rebut the fact that they've done multidimensional means, state-sponsored means, to steal our technology. In fact, Germany is restricting what China can buy there for key critical technologies. Poland just arrested Huawei officials. One rebuts that. And, oh, by the way, since the tariffs went into effect against China, on the basis of their massive technology theft, state-directed, the biggest technology theft in the history of the world, they still don't admit that they're doing it. They don't admit there's a problem. They play the long game. And so finally someone's standing up, and the Europeans and the Japanese have joined us with the Europeans in a WTO case against Chinese aggressive and wrongful technology transfer and IP theft practices.
So, Michael, is there any deal that you think that should be done? I mean, what would be a good deal? Or is it just like, in your piece you say that we should increase tariffs despite the talks. Even if the talks are positive, we should increase tariffs. Is there any deal that would be acceptable to you?
Well, if I were king, no, for this reason. China's economy is wired at its fundamental level to grow excessively through excessive reliance on the U.S. consumer, right? They send $505 billion worth of products here as of 2017. We sold about 125 or 30 there. they're taking. They are not on net a big consumer market for us. We're a big consumer market for us here. They are a net supplier of glut of goods, glut of from steel to any other products. They are growing their economy in that way. They need to pivot the fundamental aspect of their economy to rely more on domestic consumers for their growth rather than U.S. consumers. And that's the imbalance of sucking the wealth out of here rather than relying on their own consumers for growth. And that's kind of why we're in relative decline over the past a few decades. And they've got to make that pivot. And even if they promised to make that pivot, they couldn't do it by March, and I wouldn't believe them anyway.
Hey, we're talking to Michael Stumo, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. He's going to stay with us. Don't leave. We got a lot more to talk about here.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we are joined by Michael Stumo, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. So, Michael, the Japanese built up, a really strong surplus with us, and look at them today. I mean, they're crawling on their belly. I mean, they have not stood straight until, what was it, into the 80s. The Japanese were going to conquer the world. They're taking over economically. They had a closed market. They tried to manipulate the markets. They tried to manipulate their currency. In short, they're doing everything that the Chinese are doing, right? And it didn't work out well with them. The Koreans, they had to eventually join the world economy and play much more fair, or they knew that the end game was coming. And the Taiwanese as well. So, look, a lot of countries have tried to beat the global trading system, and they've lost. Won't the Chinese lose in this as well? I mean, should we be really concerned about the deficit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're not going to lose unless something's done. Look, economic history is this. Hamilton and George Washington used tariffs for the exclusive source of U.S. revenue, starting with the Hamilton's report on manufacturers in 1789. For the next 133 years, the U.S. relied heavily on tariffs. In fact, we didn't even have an income tax until, quite a bit later on, because we didn't want to be a banana republic commodity supplier to Great Britain. We could have just bought cheap European goods, but we didn't. We built our own industry behind tariff walls. And by the late 1800s, we became the biggest economy in the world over Britain. Germany followed our lead from the 1830s on. Frederick List of Germany was an economist there, followed Hamilton. Fast forward to Korea after the Korean War. They were an agrarian economy, poverty-stricken, digging potatoes with their hands. They used tariff barriers, industrial strategy, and currency devaluation to become a wealthy country. Japan did the same with currency. What stopped Japan was Reagan in 1985 with the Plaza Accord, made the Japanese and the West Germans revalue their currency, devalue the dollar to come back into effect, and that was the stop of Japan's rise, which was U.S. aggressive action in the Plaza Accord. China's taking it another step of mercantilism, cheating, protectionism with tariffs, industrial strategy, and currency devaluation, and has brought more people, to their credit, on our backs, by the way, they have brought more people out of poverty than any effort in world history. So it is the opposite. It is the strategic traders that grow from poor to rich. There is no instance in world history of a country growing from poor to rich with free trade.
Rich, I want to follow up with the question, Rich, but I want to ask Michael this. It's very important. But isn't our currency, it's paper. You can't wear it. You can't eat it. You can't live in it. I mean, it's paper.
It's not even backed by gold.
Why should we care?
It's a
Why
promise.
would you care if they have our paper? I mean, they're holding our paper, which, what's the value of that paper?
Oh, gosh. Do you have another hour or two?
Okay.
My goodness.
No. The word Tracy comes to
money
mind.
and international capital flows. Huh? What's that?
the word pricey
but truly, I mean, that was the Milton Friedman answer to the Japanese accumulating our currency. We shouldn't worry about it. So why should we worry about it with the Chinese?
Right. So when China devalued by 35 or 40% in 1994, despite the fact they had cheap labor rates, that wasn't enough. They devalued. What that meant is if my members deal in international trade, they buy and sell internationally, right? The first thing you ask when you're going to buy is what's the price, what's the exchange rate, okay? So that 35 to 40% government-sponsored devaluation made everything Chinese 35 to 40% cheaper on sale, everything from China. And it made everything from the U.S. going to China 35 to 40% more expensive, which is like a tariff. So currency devaluation is like a tariff. The U.S. has an overvalued dollar. Everyone agrees from the IMF to the Treasury to us. That makes all goods and services in the U.S. more expensive than it would otherwise be if the dollar was a competitive level. And yes, the value of money is in part a mass psychology effort, but it's real and it makes real difference for pricing and international trading.
Rich, what do you think?
Well, I what I find interesting is the response from so many of the folks out there who are just panicking over this whole scenario, in not trusting in the fact that tariffs may not be a totally bad thing. They may be a good thing. They might be an awfully good tool for us, and we have an opportunity to better this country and reverse a trend and look 50 years out, look 30 years out. The Chinese don't look 5 years out or 3 years out. They're looking longer than that. And it's why they're building up their military, and that's why they're doing other things that in the long term makes them a much more powerful country on a number of different stages, whether it's economic, militarily, and so forth, and regional hegemony.
But Rich and Michael, take a look at Brazil. I mean, they're hiding behind tariffs. Take a look at India. They're hiding behind tariffs. I certainly don't want to be like Brazil and India. I mean, are the tariffs working well for them?
Sure. Well, look, we've got in the world, we've got industrial economies like us, now China, Japan, Germany, South Korea, a few others, Great Britain. We got commodity economies like Australia and Canada, and then we got the emerging or developing world, which are much more rickety, like Turkey, Argentina, and Brazil. They act very differently. It's really a bit of an apples and oranges, number one. Number two, tariffs can be a tool like taxes or any other policy that you can use or you can misuse.
Very, very fascinating. Hey, Michael, I really, really appreciate your comments, and you too, Rich. I mean, it's a very, very important discussion. I found it very insightful. We really appreciate you being on the show. Michael Stumo, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Coalition for a Prosperous America, and that is something that we can all agree upon. Michael, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, the tariff situation, and Michael brought up a good point that, hey, look, tariffs are another form of taxation. And, it's a way, and if you use the various policies right, you can come up with a better solution for your economy. But they're a form of taxation. And aren't we supposed to be wanting to get rid of taxes? Taxes mean that we're taxing, everybody. We're taxing the poor. We're taxing the middle income. Everybody's carrying that burden of taxes. And I thought that getting rid of taxes was better for economy.
Well, you would think so, unless you're a Democrat.
Well, there's a lot of Republicans now that are supporting the tariffs.
Well, that's because the Republicans don't stick together. And one thing I got to say about the Democrats, I don't like them very much, to be perfectly honest. I don't like their agenda. I don't even know what their agenda is, except self-destruction and really hurting this country at this point. It certainly isn't the Democratic Party when I was a child. But when I see what's going on out there with this big government, big tariffs, big taxes, that is, and giving away the money to everybody. I'm just, I'm kind of blown away by the whole scenario. And I think we have an opportunity to do something very, very good right now if we just stay the course. The problem is the Democrats stick together. Good, bad, or indifferent, that's a positive for them. The Republicans, not so much.
Yeah. And before it was the other way around, right? Because the Republicans are the minority party, right? There's far fewer Republicans than there are Democrats. And the only way that Republicans can win elections is if they all stick together. But they haven't been very good at that lately.
No, they don't. Not when you have 8 of them signing on with the Democrats to end the the shutdown right now. That's not a good thing. Stick with your president. Stand behind the man. Make it happen. And we don't seem to be able to do that. And that concerns me a lot right now. I mean, it really does upset me when I see what goes on. And it's always the same handful of people. If Flake was still around, then we'd say, oh, Jeff Flake would be on top. And then, of course, Susan Collins and others. I just find that to be an astounding scenario for us. It's sad.
So anyway, kind of moving on, we talked about it in a moment ago about the oil industry here in the United States. I mean, record high production. I mean, absolutely amazing. I see gasoline prices, approaching $2 a gallon. $2 a gallon. I don't know what that is, inflation adjusted pricing. But I mean, that's got to be like back to the 60s or something.
Well, you could go to Neal. You could go to Costco. My sister goes to Costco. I'm giving away tips, but she goes to Costco and fills up her gas there because she lives kind of near it in Boca, on the east side, and she got it for $1.90 something. Just about a week ago, and I just find that to be astounding. I mean, think what that if energy costs little, don't you think that's as good as putting money in everyone's pocket? Increasing their income. Income is taxable. But if you lower the amount of money you pay for energy, that's like a tax-free income. It helps you dramatically. You're
talking about, having reduced energy costs is like getting a tax break. Well, not having tariffs is like getting a tax break. And that money goes directly to the people who need it most. So I think it's a very good thing. I think it's a great thing that we try to get to renewable energies, and we're always looking and evolving and inventing. And, you got a lot of very brilliant people in this country, and they're going to find the next thing. But it's going to come in time. It's not going to come, just because, some people in Washington or wherever they come from have some sort of agenda and they just want to turn off the spigot and all the hardship that would bring so many people. And think about the job losses that we would have in this country. And these energy jobs in our country are some of the best paying jobs in our economy. I mean, so many families are benefiting from that. And yes, we do have the technology to bring down energy costs, and we do have the technology to make burning fossil fuels more safe, right? So, why force us into something that just doesn't fit today with our technology and where we are and where we have evolved to as an economy?
Just imagine if you eliminate the ability to use gasoline, you eliminate the ability to use coal, you eliminate the ability to use natural gas, you eliminate all those fuels that we have. It's not just a question of the jobs you're going to lose. It's a question of the economy that's going to go to heck completely across the board. That's a common denominator. That is a life-threatening scenario right now. That is science fiction.
Yeah, that would be devastating.
And that doesn't end well, by the way.
Hey, Rich. I'm very, very sad to tell you that we're out of time.
Yeah, but I'm going to start the next show right now. I've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah. But unfortunately, we are out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.